One thing that I did want to say, kind of as we get started, is I am not here to judge you in your habits. Some of this is very much stepping on my own toes, as we've been talking about, just sort of discussing this in advance. And I'm hopeful that this really does help us to stand on God's statutes and the things that He would have us to do, and it isn't just me telling you what I think. But just a brief kind of disclaimer. I really, as I've been studying this, have been startled and sort of unsettled by what I've learned. And so to an extent, I am intentionally building it that way, that it is going to be a bit startling. And I bet that I have way more information than we can actually cover, so I've tried to be a little selective with what we do talk about. But if you want to talk more, I'm going to do like a question and answer kind of a thing at the end. And I have a variety of resources and practical things that I hope will be useful to you as well. So most importantly, the goal that I have is to make sure that we understand this is truly, I think, an important issue, and it's become more and more so as I've studied it, and provide you with practical, real-time solutions and resources and ideas that hopefully will help you. So first of all, what is technology? I think we have to define it before we can figure out what are we doing with it. So let me ask you, if I say, what is technology, what do you think of? It isn't a trick question.
Electronics.
Electronics, right? Okay.
I'm going to say, in the interest of this class, something with a screen.
Yeah, generally something with a screen. I really think it's a bunch of stuff. All of these things, right? Computers, smartphones is probably what we're going to go to. TVs, right? But think about it. If we go back even further, there's things like the wheel. That is technology. Vehicles that we drive nowadays. Kitchen appliances, laundry machines, and beyond, right? These things are all technology. Things that we have invented that are supposed to make things easier. Technology generally promises easier everywhere. But what does technology do for us? Because it does do some good things. Anything come to mind with any of this list of stuff?
Connects us.
Yeah, it can connect us. I think back to the pandemic, right? We used Zoom a lot. When we were physically separated, we could still be together. It connected us in a way that without technology, who knows what would happen. I was very thankful for that. What else does it do for us, practically speaking?
Directions.
GPS?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm all about it. A lot of times I'm like, okay, this is where I know how to get there. What's happening in the traffic? I don't know. Yeah, GPS is fantastic. Phones, go ahead.
Entertainment.
Yeah, it can entertain us, for sure. We have games and all sorts of stuff, right?
It makes things faster, like kitchen appliances, laundry, all those
Yes.
things. I'm like, they would be so long.
So long. I don't even want to think about what laundry would be like if I didn't have washer and dryer.
Yeah.
Sweet mercy. Yeah, all these things, they allow us to go, for the most part, what we did now goes much faster. It frees us up to do a lot of other things. I was thinking, phones allow us to contact each other without carrier pigeons, right? Zoom, video calls, all those things. Computers, much faster, much more efficient than just paper. So I believe that all of these things are true. That is what technology is, and it does a lot of things for us, but I also believe that it is a thief, and that it steals from us. And one of the things that I want to say is I think of 1 Peter 5 and 8. That the devil is a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. He's prowling around. And in many regards, I think there are aspects of technology that describes very well as well. So my question to follow, what does it steal from us?
Connection.
Yeah, ironically, right? Right? That's one of the big ones. And it's on my list, but it's not first, so we're not going to talk about first. But what else? Anything come to mind?
Time.
Time! Yeah. Hey! We have a winner. That's the first one. Anything else? Before I just go ahead and dive into time. It's okay. Things can come up. You can comment during.
I would say similar thing, just like we said, connection, like time, it gives us time, but it also takes it
Right,
away.
right. It's a great irony. Yeah. So whenever I think of time, if I'm sitting on my couch or whatever, sometimes we use it deliberately what we call to waste time. I'm sitting and waiting for an appointment. I'm going to fiddle, right? Or whatever, right? I'm bored. I'm going to fiddle. So I'm burning time. But also, have you ever, not necessarily been intending to waste time, but then you start scrolling through whatever social media you're looking at, and you go, wow, it's been an hour, or whatever length of time. Video game apps or YouTube, if you notice, look at the screen, the clock is not on the screen while you open the game, or while you open videos. It's not there, and I think that's on purpose. They're intentionally designed to keep you engaged. Some of the things I've learned is they want to keep you there as long as they possibly can. The whole concept of the infinite scrolling. There is no longer a bottom of Facebook. I remember when it first started, you could scroll and it was like, that's it. You found the end of the internet. But now they invented infinite scrolling so that you will stay there as long as they can keep you there. And it continues to introduce new things to you that are custom tailored to you. Not me, to you. So that each of us have a different experience that is curated specifically for us to keep us there as long as we can. Because when we can keep you there, we can change the way you think. That's a little bit unsettling, because if they can keep your attention, if they can keep your time, they will change you. And that's what they're trying to do. Whether it's to sell you something or to make you vote a certain way, they're trying to change you. And I remember, this is funny because it's a movie quote from a movie that I never saw and have no intent to do so. But I remember the previews. They said, you can dance with the devil, and the devil don't change. The devil changes you. I may or may not, I'm not going to say where movie it's from, so you don't go try to find it. I don't think it's a good thing. But I think technology is that way. Granted, it actually does change. It continues to change. However, it changes us at the same time. Another one that I think of is development. And there's a couple of elements of this here. We want to talk about brain development first. And this is particularly what I wanted to talk about with young families, because a lot of what I'm going to say pertains to children. They say that screen time is very much like a drug. It literally changes your brain chemistry. It's kind of like a stimulant, not unlike caffeine, nicotine, or even cocaine, from Dr. Victoria Dunkley. I think Dunkley is an unfortunate last name, but it is what it is. Smartphones and their screens, they light up the same part of the brain that opioids and cannabis do. The reward pathways mediated by dopamine respond to screens in a very similar way to opioids, which I think is very interesting. You made it! I am in fact recording it too. So they have done some MRI scans on children and teens who report using smartphones, tablets, and video games 7+ hours daily, that they are significantly different in their brain development than those who do not. Children who use screens more than 2 hours daily get consistently lower scores on thinking and language tests. So they say that brain scans indicate that children who get a lot of screen time also have thinning of the cortex, which is the outermost layer of the brain that processes your 5 senses. This usually happens in adults at the age of 60 and beyond, but it is now happening in children prematurely, largely due to screen time. So this is a result of not being in the real world, so to speak, where you actually need all your 5 senses to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch things. And so they again, brain scans for kids who play 20+ hours of video games a week, which if you think about it is not that much. That's only 3 hours in a given day. That racks up faster than you think it does. And their scans show similar to people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol, which is, again, unsettling to me to think of what's happening here. So these devices with screens, they increase the production of cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And so apparently the more enticing the video content that they're watching, the higher those hormone levels go. And so there becomes this great dissonance between your physical and your mental state and your stress levels. Because your body is getting keyed up into sort of a fight or flight response, but you're sitting still. So there's this tremendous dissonance between the two. I'm ready to fight or flight, but I'm completely sedentary. And I think that explains largely the explosive response whenever you go, give me your gaming device. The kids oftentimes will blow up. I know whenever I was a kid, if I was playing video games and you shut it off, it is on, right? So screen time, both games and television stimulate that fight and flight response, and so that's why we're angry whenever we turn it off or take it away. They're keyed up, they have all this adrenaline and cortisol built up, and they're sitting completely still. Just an anecdotal story. At VBS last year, whenever we got COVID, Megan had it first, and I was totally fine. So I would cook for her and bring things that she needed. But in the meantime, I was like, I'm stuck in the house. What am I going to do? I was like, I never beat Metroid on the original Nintendo. So I did that. I was like, I'm going to play through it. And then I was like, I have this other, the Super Metroid on this. I was like, I'm going to try that too. And I found, after I made it part of the way through, I was like, I'm getting angry, and I don't even know why. Like, I'm just mad. And the longer that I played, I realized I was getting more and more angry. So what in the world is going on? And I'm like reading this going, oh, my stress hormones just sitting there looking at this screen, being enthralled with it, have built up to where I was just mad as an adult. So I had to go outside, and I finally started to calm down, which I think is interesting. So I have this video that I came across. You may or may not have seen. Yeah. This is, I think, an extreme example, but watch what happens here. Can you see? Okay. Watch what happens here, and I'm going to tell you why, if you haven't already learned. This kid is like 270 pounds, by the way. Big kid. Absolutely beats this lady. It's kind of crazy how many people just sort of stand by.
In the room.
Yeah, in the room. Finally engages, right? So, some of you may or may not know why. Do you know why?
He took away his Switch.
They took away his Nintendo Switch. And I'm like, I think this is not beautiful, but a perfect example of what we're talking about. This kid has become addicted to, or whatever you want to call it, this stimulus of screen time in these games, and somebody took it from him, and he went off. But he's not a 2 or a 3-year-old. That's not necessarily dangerous. He's a 270-pound teenager that's big and strong and really hurt this lady. So my understanding is when there is chronic overstimulation of the brain from too much screen time in video games as well, the blood flow in the brain is rerouted from the frontal part of the brain called the neocortex, which is the thinking and the rational part of the brain where you're going to have the most human sort of things, down into the very center of the brain, the amygdala, which people call the reptile brain. It's responsible for things like breathing and functioning. Think about a reptile. Do I eat it? Do I fight with it? What do I do? I need to breathe, swallow, just strictly survival, no more thinking. So when we switch from using the rational and thinking part of the brain down to the I just have to stay alive part of the brain, we start to shut off the most human part of the brain that is responsible for regulating mood, decision making, prioritizing, impulse control, empathy, and creativity. So when your child is playing video games and they may forget what they're doing, or they forget to do something like chores, or maybe they forget even to go to the bathroom, it's because this outer part of the brain has literally turned off that's responsible for making decisions. So in short, the self-control part of the brain has been turned off because it is not getting any blood. Dennis, would you mind to read the fruits of the Spirit?
So read from there.
Sure.
The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law, and those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires.
A lot of these things on this list, particularly the last one, self-control. Whenever we're shut off the neocortex, we've literally turned off some of the fruits of the Spirit. They're literally shutting those things down. That to me was kind of like a red flag that I'm going, oh, sweet mercy. Like we're squashing the Spirit. Because in thinking about the kid who beat up his teacher, right? That's not gentle, that's not goodness, that's not kindness, there's no patience, there's no peace. All those things are gone because of his Nintendo Switch, right? So to me, this is just a little bit unsettling. Whenever I think about these things are shutting off the fruits of the Spirit. These are warnings from this book, Screen Kids. If you know Gary Chapman, The 5 Love Languages, same guy wrote this with another doctor. These are things that are normal behavior for children as well. They aren't only going to be warnings of too much screen time. If you want, you could take a picture of it. I can give you my notes later. However you want to do that, if you want to write these down. But If your child is very irritable, tearful, depressed, or angry, they've got a hard time focusing, they're forgetful and disorganized, they're defiant and impulsive, not empathetic, or have poor social skills, these can be warnings of too much screen time. Like I said, some of these things are normal child behavior as well. So don't just go, oh no, my kid is broken, right? Some of this is normal behavior, so don't freak out. But also, if this is like really consistent over the top, these are warning signs. Another one, how screen time impacts the brain. These are things that we were just talking about. The thinning of the cortex, right? We talked about you have lower scores on thinking and language tests. The stress hormone of cortisol rises. The blue light that you see changes your body's clock. You have reduced dopamine receptors and transporters. Again, the brain scans of video game players and drug addicts look similar. And then you have abnormal processing, which is your decision-making skills that get impaired. Again, these are things that are concerning to me, right? And I think we need to pay attention to. Video game addiction is becoming a very real issue. There are now professions around treating video game addiction. The fact that there's a profession says this really is a problem. Apparently it's more of a problem in boys than girls, just for what it's worth. And they say that high school students who are struggling with video game and they're all about video games, it only gets worse when they go to college. And the same is really true in elementary school children. So the time to step in and intervene is now. Be aware of these things up front. Also true of television time. In 1970, the average child started watching TV at the age of 4 years old. Now, currently, 4 months old. Very different. And they say each hour daily of watching TV before you're 3 years old increases the likelihood of attention deficit problems by 10%, which is pretty substantial. Because between birth and 3 years old, the brain development, it literally triples in size. So while it's developing during that time, there are some significant neural pathways that are being formed and established. And if the children are not using their senses and engaging their bodies and minds, those pathways don't get formed. And if they don't get formed, they don't get formed. The brain starts to prune excess neurons and such for the sake of efficiency, because it's all about efficiency and they don't come back. So if your children are more attached to technology and devices than they are to their caregivers, or their parents, which would be you, the brain also starts to prune the neurons associated with language development and emotional stability due to lack of use. So essentially, it's a use it or lose it type of scenario. So if your kids are learning to read, write, do music, play, and all these things, that's what their brain is going to develop. But if they're laying around watching screens and playing video games all the time, or YouTube or whatever, that's what their brain is going to develop. So it's important to ask, what kind of development do we want to encourage? But be encouraged. The brain doesn't stop developing in males until 25 or 6 years old, and females in 21 to 3 years old, depending. So there is time to make changes for healthy brain development. So how do you go about that? How do we nurture healthy brain development? A few things. Downtime. Just like your body needs time to recover from physical exercise, the brain needs downtime to be able to consolidate what is being learned. So when your child is saying, I'm bored, it's actually good for them. Their brain will actually be able to synthesize what they're learning, and they'll be able to grow. They'll be able to process better. Another one is physical exercise. It's a natural de-stressor, and it's something that you want to aim for at least an hour daily for this, and ideally through unstructured playtime. The environment created by unstructured play is critical for creative development and relational development. Think about watching kids play versus adult-led play, right? Children make up their own world. Like, they're so imaginative and creative, and they almost build their own little societies and learn how to interact with each other, and they're like, no, the rules are this. Like, they establish almost their own society. And this is very beneficial for learning how to interact with each other on their own. And it's beneficial for developing the prefrontal cortex of the brain and for their social development. Another one that's very critical is sleep. getting adequate sleep is critical for brain development, particularly for young children. It's probably more sleep than you might even think. Even teens, they actually need quite a bit of sleep. Usually on the order of 9 or more hours a night is not an unusual thing, which means they've got to go to bed. A lot of times, well, I know whenever I was a teenager, wanted to stay up late, right? But then I also wanted to sleep till noon, and it's like, well, these things don't work together, right? But they need a lot of sleep for your brain to actually grow and develop and do what it needs to do. Nutrition is also very critical. The brain uses 20% of the calories that we consume. And so you need to get plenty of nutrient-rich food to encourage good brain development. So that means a diet that's rich in protein, complex carbohydrates, things like apples, carrots, and sweet potatoes. Other good foods are chicken, eggs, cheese, turkey, salmon, spinach, beans, seeds, and nuts. All of these things I think is fascinating. They're foods that God made. They're the things that He created. And they naturally also produce serotonin. Serotonin, of course, is associated with happiness and calmness. While screen time diminishes serotonin and produces dopamine, resulting in the nearly drug-addicted type brain, good nutrition and exercise and good sleep reverse those effects. So, these I think are very important things. So the other one, physical development, not just brain development, but physical development. One of the things that has been studied is the average child from the 1980s. Their fitness tests. You want to close the door? Sorry. Whose kid is that?
Yeah, we can need sleep.
The kids from the 1980s, they would do fitness tests to determine their strength and overall fitness. And they said the average child from the 1980s would beat the top percentile from current days. Because the current, we're just sitting around. We aren't going and playing. We aren't swinging in trees. We're not climbing trees. We're not doing all the things that old kids used to do, like us. That's from this book, The Balanced and Barefoot, with Angela Hanscom. She's an occupational therapist. So anyway, another thing it's stealing from us, I believe very much, is creativity. I wanted to read from this real quick. It's one of those where I'm like, I can't say it as good as the person who actually did the research, so I was going to read this. But this is from Angela Hanscom, again, occupational therapist. The title of this section, Why Doesn't My Child Like to Play? So she says, have you sent your children out to play only to return minutes later? There's nothing to do out there. I'm bored. Well, studies indicate that children's play habits have changed drastically in the past few decades. The amount of time children spend in unstructured play has decreased by 50%, resulting in children devoting most of their time to indoor activities. Children are also spending more time than ever in front of electronic screens. Research suggests that the average child spends at least 6 hours a day in front of the television or a computer or playing video games, and that comes from 2010. So that's 13-year-old research. With a substantial decrease in the amount of time children spend in unstructured play outdoors, it's no wonder they have trouble playing independently and creatively. Teachers often take turns observing children at recess time, and when I asked a few teachers about the play skills of children today compared to years ago, 30 years ago, they said, there's less imaginary play. We see a lot of pretend play in the past, but children today are not creating their own games and worlds around the playground. Now, they gravitate toward the play structure or play a game of tag until the whistle blows to go back inside. See, it's really noisy and crazy. Seems like they run around with no purpose. There's little creativity like we observed in the past. It's like they don't know what to do with themselves. There are a lot of children coming up and tattling and coming up to seek constant direction and reassurance on what to play or what to do. It's both frustrating and sad to watch. So children are starting to lose their desire and their ability to play, something that should be so fundamental to human nature. So why aren't they developing their own games, or if they want to play at all? Why do they seem to prefer structured activities and unstructured, rather than unstructured ones, and to seek adult guidance rather than lead their peers on their own? And we wonder if this lack of imaginative play is harming them in other ways. Again, kind of unsettling to think about the changes that are happening. But the big recommendation is outdoor free play. where they get to do things on their own. Because more than anything, it helps them to develop their motor skills, their sensory skills, and they begin to improve their academic performance, which I think is interesting. Outdoor free play improves academic performance, not what we necessarily would think. I remember I talked to Dennis last September-ish, and you were telling me about the idea that no screen time for your kids for like a month in the summer. And you're like, they started being much more creative. They started building things, and they started creating things, and they started playing outside and differently. And it was like, it didn't take long, but they readapted to what you were doing. And I'm like, that's it, right? So another one that is stealing from us, I think, is attention. Technology promises easy everywhere, but it says it's going to take away these hard things of life, like we talked about. Dishwashers make washing dishes faster. Laundry machines make it so much quicker. Computers, they spell check for us. They store data for us. They remind us what we need to do today. Modern cell phones provide, well, I moved it, here it is, provide so many things right in our own pocket. Of course, I remember my teacher used to say, you're not always going to have a calculator. That's why we have to learn it the hard way. And I'm like, oh, but I do. And I have a very good calculator that even if I forgot the formula, I could go look it up. So that promise of easy everywhere comes at a cost. And I think it comes at the cost of distraction. I always say everything costs something. Not always a bad thing, but everything costs something. And so it's largely become a distraction for us. It distracts sometimes on purpose, and sometimes not on purpose, from things that may be very important. It is said that the mere presence of your smartphone, even face down on a table, will reduce your attention by as much as 50%. I wanted to tell a story. I apologize if I get emotional, but one of the things that I remember, because I'm trying to make sure you know, this is me too. It's not, I'm not pointing fingers. You can hear it trying out there. Our journey to having children was not an easy one. And I remember early on, we thought it was going to be easy. 2 or 3 months in to trying to have children, Megan was pregnant one time. And there was one day she said, my back feels funny, like something's wrong, you know. So we went to one doctor's appointment, and they were performing an ultrasound. And I remember it was supposed to be 7 or 8 weeks along, and they said it's only at 5. And the lady said to Megan, she said, I'm sorry. It's not going to make it, right? Your baby has died. And I remember what I was doing was sitting in a chair over to the side, working through my emails like an absolute idiot. And I always think, and I've told Megan this so many times, if I could go back and beat the snot out of my own self and be like, pay attention! This is an important moment and you won't get it back. This is the one. What are you doing? I wish so badly that I could change what I did that day. If I could, you better believe I would. But I feel like technology robbed me of being present for what I would say was a life-critical moment. I didn't know it at the time, but it was. And I might say it's my lack of discipline with technology that really robbed me. Nevertheless, technology I blame. Maybe you relate, probably not exactly the same story, but maybe not, I don't know. But most of us as humanity, we have social media of some sort on our smart devices, and we would look at it probably multiple times daily. And these distractions keep us away from silence and solitude, usually at our own desire. We don't like silence and we don't like solitude. When we think about silence and solitude, that is usually reserved for some of the most cruel of punishments in prison. You got to go to solitary confinement, right? And we feel that when we don't have our cell phone or whatever, we're like, oh no, I don't want to have my silence and solitude. But silence and solitude are where we find the most revealing things about ourselves, and I think it's where we get closer to God as well. And when we don't have our phones, we really become aware of that. But silence and solitude are also some of the most beneficial of spiritual disciplines for us if we will lean into them. The greatest command says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. It's difficult. This comes from one of these books. It's difficult to serve God with our whole heart, soul, mind, and strength when we're diverted and distracted and multitasking everything. And I think that's a very true statement. One of the things that this book is the 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. One of the things that he talks about in there is this test they did on reading. Whenever we read via technology, we read skimmingly. A word I made up, but I'm pretty sure you know what I mean. If you scroll through social media, do you read every single word you see? No, we're mostly looking for pictures, like a little kid's book, right? If you see somebody, long post warning, I'm scrolling past that one, right? Too long, did not read. But one of the things that they were talking about is this test groups. They had two groups of people. They said, you read this 1,000-word article, both. You're going to have paper, you're going to have technology. One time they said, you have this length of time that we want you to read. They took tests, they scored about the same. The next time they said, finish the article, when you're done, take the test. Different article, and the people who read with technology versus paper, they scored dramatically lower than the people who read on paper. There's something about reading in technology that we skim. We've trained ourselves to do it largely. But when we read with paper, we do something different. One of the things, you've probably found this phenomenon. I can remember, I read something and it was right here on the page. You know what I'm talking about? This location on the page thing. Whenever you read on technology, gone. That anchor point is no longer there because it moves on the screen. Or we're scrolling, it's gone. That goes away with digital reading. But the most important thing, we no longer linger over what we're reading. And whenever you think about Scripture, we must linger over the text because it is to change us. It is to form us. It is to develop us from inside. And if we just skim through it, it's not doing its changing work because we're not even absorbing it. So I would say maybe reading on a device is maybe not the best way to go. However, if you read on a device and you have an app that prompts you to read and you actually do read, and you, by all means, please keep doing that. Don't hear me saying don't read on your phone. I'm just saying, for me, that doesn't work. Maybe it does for you. But some of the research has said people will stick to a reading plan better if they have it on an app. So I'm like, if it works for you, read it. It's way more important that you read it than how you read it. Yes.
Did it say anything about like Audible, like listening to books?
Listening
Like
as,
audiobooks?
insofar as the research that I've done, I didn't get into the auditory part, more the visual screen part of it, so I don't know.
But I was gonna say, I know when you're really busy and you're doing laundry
Yeah.
or something, it's like,
Yeah.
you can't sit and read whether it's a book or a screen,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
you can listen to it, right? Like,
yeah, and I would go
you
back
get
and
a lot
say,
more books when you just kind of,
Sure.
I don't know, I feel like
Sure.
I get more reading in.
yeah. Well, particularly too if you're an auditory person,
That's true.
because if you're visual and you don't see it and you need to see it, maybe that doesn't work. But if it works because you're an auditory person, by all means,
Yeah,
you know. And I would say again, that's way better than not reading it.
yeah.
So I would say at least do something, even if you feel like this isn't the best, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
By all means, you know. So I'm not totally sure.
Yeah.
But if it works, I would do it. You know. So yeah, by all means, yeah. But no, I haven't actually read any research to that
For
effect.
the audio, so.
Anyway, another one about the attention piece. There may have been a pre-digital age, but there has never been a time without distractions. So this isn't really new to us. Distraction is something that has always really been around. We just have to figure out how to manage the things that are going on in our lives in our time now. And one of the things that I think is significant is that we don't leave that void empty. Because if we're saying we need to minimize technology, we need to get rid of something, I'm reminded of the parable of the unclean spirit. Goes wandering through waterless places and he goes, you know what? I'm going back to the place that I started. Finds it clean, swept, and everything put in place, and it goes and finds 7 more wicked than itself, and the final state of the person is worse than the first. And I think if we don't take care to fill our lives with good things, then the bad things can very much come back. Now, that doesn't mean that you should fill your life with busyness, right? But I think it means we need to be deliberate with what you do. Sometimes putting good things into your life might mean deliberately putting nothing there. Practicing that silence, practicing that solitude. Maybe you're just going to say, we're going to rest. We've been going crazy. We're going to take the good gift of the Sabbath and we're going to take a day off. That's nothing, but it's purposeful. The purposeful nothing, I think, is significant. So you're not emptying your life, you're actually putting life-giving things into it by scheduling nothing on purpose. So you are putting your attention rather and focus on God and seeking His kingdom and His righteousness before all these other things. I think Cassie said this one. The other one that I think is from us very much is connection. The more digitally connected we have become, the more socially disconnected we have become. Social media is anything but social, right? So when you go to restaurants and you go out in public and you see people sitting at the same table together, what do you see? Something like this, right? Almost more than not.
Are they texting each other?
Probably. Probably. Gotta have those hard conversations via text. We're staring at a device. That's not social interaction, right? Because technology has stolen human interaction. And we'll talk more about some of that in just a moment. One thing that I observed, we went to Lubbock last weekend and got to see my older nephews who are big, tall kids. I hugged them and like, my head hit their sternum. I was like, you know, I remember you're taller than me, but this is ridiculous. Anyway, they are all about their devices. They even brought their chargers with them. And it was like, you're going to be here for less than 12 hours. Like, why don't you need to make sure, it's going to die, I got to have it, you know. Even to the point that we bring in our chargers. I was like, I don't even get to see you but like once a year. And you're going to be on your phone the whole time? You know, my younger nephew and niece, they were on their tablets, reasonable amounts. They had obvious time limits. They asked me to watch memes with me. They watched this nonsense. We burned 10 minutes in a hurry. And it was like, I didn't even hardly realize that we were just sitting there in silence next to each other watching stupid, worthless videos that changed every 10 seconds. Rambunctious kids that had all sorts of energy turned into vegetables or couch potatoes, unfortunately myself included, right? Just like that, being connected to the internet disconnected us from each other, even in the same room. From your nods, I'm like, you've seen this too. You've probably experienced it more than you care to admit. You may have participated, just like me, more than we all care to admit. But what I think is significant is God says it is not good that man should be alone. To the extent that He said, I've got to create a helper fit for him. All these animals and things are great, but they aren't doing it. He needs to be in relationship with somebody like him. And I think this doesn't just mean man. Incidentally, the word for man, Adam, Adam's name, Adam, is also mankind. And I would say this one could easily be translated as mankind. Male and female alike. It is not good for you to be alone. And so I think you created us to have interaction, community with one another. Think about the design of the church. Many parts, one body. We need to interact with one another. And I'm afraid that the pandemic largely increased our use of technology and our dependence on it in many ways. It can do great things for us, and I would argue during that season it was a lifeline in many regards. But it can be very dangerous to us as well. And it allowed us access, as we talked about, to one another when we were supposed to be apart. But it also, in some cases, drove us further into the devices and further from each other. One of the things, I was talking about the lack of interacting with people. They have noticed a tremendous collapse in the birth rate. South Korea, they are way ahead of the U.S. as far as their technological advances, and they have really noticed a dramatic drop in birth rate. They said you can see people now, and this happens in our society, getting married later and later. My neighbors have been married for 68 years in Anna. They married when they were 13 and 16. I was like, no way. I was such an idiot kid, there's no way. But I'm like, they got married then. I didn't get married till I was 25. Some people don't get married till they're in their 30s, right? Later and later. They were saying in South Korea, many young men in their 20s have now spent well over 10,000 hours playing video games instead of doing more productive things. You can also see this in the lack of teen pregnancy. This is an interesting one to me. People are starting to choose pornography on screens over actual women, hence a lower birth rate. These are not good things. They're not, young people in general are not interacting with people anymore. They don't interact with each other. That's not good. Don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating for teen pregnancy. That's not what I'm saying. But the fact that we are choosing screens over actual people is a problem. This is not good. It objectifies all these things. And I think as a result of that, it has very much stolen our happiness. One of the things that is significant is anger. Online spreads way faster than it does in person, and it is the single predictor of a viral post. The single greatest predictor. They said heated debates spread way faster than almost anything else. You can post fun things, joyful things, they don't really go anywhere. Anger, heated debates go everywhere. Jesus would say that the anger of man does not bring about the righteousness of God. Right? Another one, whenever I look at Colossians 3, Paul is talking about putting off the old self with its practices and put on the new self. And he says we have to put to death what is earthly in you, putting them all away, anger, wrath, malice, slander, and obscene talk from your mouth. These things that are going everywhere online, he says put that to death. And I'm like, I'm sure I've participated in it, so I'm not trying to throw rocks at everybody, and not myself. But I'm like, you look online and it's like, there's some angry stuff going around. And it's not the fruits of the Spirit, like we talked about earlier. Interesting thing also with the happiness, these devices have caused adolescent spikes in depression, anxiety, and so forth. Technology causes us to be much more alone than we ever have been. Again, it isn't good that man should be alone. People's lives are getting thinner and thinner the more wealth we have and the more connected that we are. So they say that kids are not doing the typical rebellious things of sex, drugs, and alcohol and rock and roll, right? But anxiety has skyrocketed. And they say this seems to be because of a loss of real, legitimate human contact with people. We're not helping our young people by giving them technology only. One of the resources is humanetech.com. I would encourage you to look there. They have some really good resources. But one of the studies, a longitudinal study of several thousand adolescents, indicated that their level of social media usage was a significant predictor of their depression levels over the course of 4 years. For every increased hour spent using social media, teens show a 2% increase in depressive symptoms. And then another one, after 2 decades in decline, high depressive symptoms for 13 to 18-year-old teen girls rose by 65% between 2010 and 2017. Do you know what happened in 2010? This isn't coincidental, I don't think. 2 things. Smartphones became much more available, and you didn't have to be in college. You now had to be 13 or older to have a social media account. So as soon as the social media and smartphones became available, immediately depressive symptoms in young teen girls 13 years old and older skyrocket. Not a coincidence, right? So it correlates directly to that time frame. So one of the quotes that I heard from, if you haven't watched The Social Dilemma, they were talking about social media. They said it's plain as day. These services are killing people and causing people to kill themselves. So this is a very serious issue that we need to be addressing with our children and with ourselves. And this is one for me, I'm really trying with my own self, because it starts with us. The good news, when you increasingly limit technology, you increasingly become capable of happiness, and more happiness, because it's like strength training. The more you lift, the more you're able to lift. The same, the greater you develop this happiness, the greater capacity to be happy that you have. So you begin also to experience fewer feelings of loneliness by disconnecting from technology. So you should find people, real life people, that you truly can connect with, not more devices. So the question, what can we do about this? Because it's a pretty dire picture, I think. I was talking to Megan about it, and I was like, I feel like burdened by this almost, and I was like, it's heavy to deal with. But one of the things that I want to say is there is something to be done. There is somewhere to go. One of them is this is from Andy Crouch's book, The TechWise Family. If I could recommend one, this is it. You've read it?
I've read
Yeah. He has these 10 TechWise commitments. Granted, these are suggestions for you. If they don't work for you, don't use them. But I think some of them are better than others. If you want to take a picture, if you want to write them down, if you want my slides, I'll send them to you, whatever. In the interest of time, we got to keep moving. But there are a bunch of things here that I think are worthwhile. I'm going to talk about a couple. The ones. 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, 1 week a year. His recommendation is 1 hour a day. If it has an off switch, turn it off. To the extent that they eat dinner in candlelight, which I was like, that's pretty extreme. He goes, you don't have to do that. It's just something that we like to do. But they turn off all electronic devices. If it has an off switch, it's off. 1 day a week, and I think on 1 day a week they actually do use electric lights and stuff. But they disconnect from any internet-based kind of technology on purpose, and then for 1 week a year. Though he said they even go on like 2-week vacations, and I listened to a thing, he said, I have an automatic reply set up that says, I'm sorry, I will never read this email. He has a thing that forwards it automatically to delete. He won't even read it. Says, if you want me to read it, email me after this date, I'll be back. So if you need me, I'm coming back at this time, but I won't read this. And I was like, that's intense, you know. He said there's like a 1/3 rule. 1/3 of the time you sort of detox, 1/3 of the time you're loving life, and the last third you're dreading going back to it all. And I was like, we haven't done it yet, but I'm kind of interested in trying the 1 week with no technology, just to see what is that like. Because it's been a while. I grew up that way, but it's been a while. The other thing, designate times where there's no technology allowed. Maybe that's dinner time, maybe it's bedtime. One of the things he says is devices go to bed before you, and you wake up before they do, right? And so maybe they're not in your bedroom, no devices in your bedroom, maybe not at your dinner table. Again, things like this where you can turn all those things off. The other one that I really liked is we don't use technology alone. We use it together and for a purpose, no aimlessness. So if we're watching TV, we watch it together. If it's on, we are watching it. Music, if it's on, we are listening to it. No individual screens and music, so that we are now in community sharing an experience rather than in isolation. Another one that I think is important is the 7-minute rule. It applies to conversation. People can carry small talk for roughly 7 minutes. And after about 7 minutes, you've probably felt it too, where you're like, well, you know, that's all I really want to say to you. I gotta go, you know. You don't say that, of course, but you get to that awkward point where you have to make a choice. Are we going to talk about serious things now or keep the small talk, and are we done? After 7 minutes is whenever the real conversations happen, right? So one of the things that is recommended is car time. No screens in the car. Think about that around here. I don't know where I go that take me at least 7 minutes to get there, right? Usually it's a lot longer than that. So if you take your time in the car to be conversation time, this is good. The problem you run into, the 7 minutes start over if it gets interrupted. So if you have to make a phone call, you get a text message, or you're watching videos, you never make it past the 7-minute mark because it's consistently interrupted. But if you take those times to deliberately talk to your children, then you get past it. Now, I have, it says there's 25, I actually have 26 on here. These are things that you can ask your kids, how was your day, that they cannot say yes or no to. So that's a good conversation starter when you can't say yes or no, or it was fine. You actually have to think about it. So again, I'm not a proponent of ridding ourselves completely of technology. I think that's foolish, but we've got to figure out how to wrangle it. So another one of these, and this one it's not so much from the 10 commitments, but active free play. It's a significant part of overcoming technology and the negative impacts of it, right? There's an illustration given in the Balanced and Barefoot book that I'm not going to read, but the concept is, think about a typical day of a child during school. Wake up early, go sit at the breakfast table, and you know, maybe if I finish breakfast early or whatever, I can sit and watch some cartoons or maybe a little YouTube before we have to go to school while mom and dad get ready. Then whenever I get to, I ride to school, sitting down. I sit at my desk whenever I'm at school. Maybe we go and we work on a computer for a little while. Maybe we go sit in the library. We sit down at lunch. You might get 20 minutes of physical exercise at recess, And then you'll sit somewhere during school and ride home. Now you're home, what do? Probably sit down and do homework. Right? All these kinds of things. You're sitting down, and so the kids are kind of going nuts by this point. And they're like antsy, and they're like, okay, fine. You can go mess with your iPad, or you can play video games or whatever. And they did not get unstructured playtime. Some of the outdoor free play, that's too soon. Outdoor free play is part of the critical element here. 20 minutes is enough to ramp up, but it's not enough to come back down. So you may notice in 20 minutes your kids go crazy and they're like wild and nuts. What they need is enough time to ramp up to play, and then play for a little while, and then be able to come back down. Usually takes at least 45 minutes based on some research to be able to ramp up, play, and then come back down. So if you don't have a full hour, 20 minutes might actually be a bad thing for your kids to be all keyed up, because they need that time to be able to come back down. Because if you're going to play freely, you've got to figure out, what are we going to play, how are we going to play it, what are the rules here, play for a little while, and then kind of calm down, right? So it takes time. That means we cannot overschedule ourselves. You and your children, all of you, need downtime. That's part of one of the 10 Commandments. We're created for a rhythm of work and rest. God worked for 6 days and he rested for 1. We're not bound by the law of the Sabbath, but it is a gift to a non-slave people. More can be said about that, but we don't have time. Work and rest versus toil and leisure. Work and rest are fruitful things to do. Toil and leisure are not so fruitful. Again, thousands of years, we could see blue light only during daytime. But now, because of technology, we can see blue 24 hours a day. And it has messed with the circadian rhythm, the waking and sleeping cycle. So God's creation, the way it works, the way the blues and greens outside work, are calming to you. And then the sun goes down, and it's time to rest. Right? There's this natural rhythm that's designed there. And it's interesting that God's creation largely has the ability to offset the harms that are done from technology. So another one, books. I'm a big proponent of books. They're very much more formative than they are like consuming devices, like technology. Think about reading. You have to imagine the world that you're reading. Video takes your imagination from you. Whenever you're reading, you have to imagine, and that's a good thing for children. One thing you can do, read aloud. It becomes a shared experience as a family. Maybe also very much a bonding experience for your family. Reading with your children is a very good thing to do to help bond you all together. Helps you create an us versus the world kind of mentality. We are team, whatever your last name is. And that's a good thing. So if you can do things that are more relational than screen-based, this is going to be good for you. Many times the simple games are more about the relationship and the conversating than the game, because the game is very simple. So a few resources, and we're pushing time, that I recommend and studied a lot for this. There are more, but these are the ones that I really recommend. The TechWise family is probably the one I would say, if you don't have time for all the others, that's the one that I would say, read that one. I've enjoyed the 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. It's more geared towards adults than children, but it has a lot of theology behind it. The Crossway, who is responsible for the ESV translation, that group put that out, so it's got a lot of scripture behind it. Screen Kids, Gary Chapman, 5 Love Languages, he wrote it along with Arlene Pellicane, and they talk a lot about the impact of what it does to the attitude, not being able to apologize anymore because we do it via technology and such. Good things there. For resources, what do you do for your 1,000 hours outside? If you're trying to be outside and be creative, the 1,000 hours outside is a list of activities for cold, hot, whatever time seasons. Balanced and Barefoot is very much textbookish. It's got some good information and things you can do, and a lot of the research behind the whys. This one doesn't have as much of the research. It's like my anecdotal experience of eliminating technology and what we've found to be beneficial. But I like it a lot. The other one, humanetech.com. They have a lot of, these are the digital well-being guidelines. There's a lot of stuff here. They have a ledger of harms, which is interesting on their website, and that's where some of this research came from. Things that it is doing to us, the depression, the anxiety, the increase in alcoholism, all these kinds of things as a result of technology. Humanetech.com. They're also the people responsible for the Social Dilemma documentary on Netflix. They're about ethical use of technology. And then this is kind of an interesting app. One sec, hold on, one sec. it is an app that it helps you to delay. It works like this. If I open Facebook, it says it's time to take a deep breath. Comes down and it says in the last 45 hours ago you last opened this. It says, do you still want to open it? Continue to Facebook or no? I can say, yes, I do. And then it says, what are your intentions? And it says, are you bored? Are you stressed? Are you tired? Are you anxious? And my favorite, maybe you're sitting on the toilet. Like, hey, you know, we've all been there, right? But it's interesting because I've personally used way too much YouTube. I watch all these videos and I'm like, man, I'm trying not to do that. And it's like, even going to bed at night, I'm watching YouTube and I'm like, this is not good. And so I've been using this, and I would say, and I was asking Megan, I'm like an observable change in my technology use. I recommend it. It's a little fiddly to set it up because you have to set up rules for it to do the things it's supposed to do, but it also filters content. You can help it to make focus time and different things like this as well. And then these, if your kids need to have the ability to call, Gab Technologies offer smartwatches and smartphones that have no internet capacity. So they have a GPS, you can know where your kid is if they need to be found. They have the smartwatches, they can do different things. You can call them and they can talk to you. I think it only programs in a few phone numbers, but they're pretty good technology as well, so you can still have a phone and access to things like GPS and such if they really need it. Again, so you don't have to be completely without any technology. You can have things like this for your children without some of the harms. So the most important thing that I would say is take time to disconnect from your technology and connect with your family, and especially take time to connect with God. So I know we're over time. I'm willing to stay and ask, conversate, talk, question and answers, these kinds of things. Also, if you need to go get your kids, whatever, do what you need to do. But if you'd like to talk, if you want to look at the resources, if you want a copy of this for the conversations, whatever. You've got time. I have time as much as you need. So that's what I have. So I hope it was helpful. If you don't mind providing feedback on it, I intend to do some of these kinds of classes more often. We may talk about technology again in another year or 18 months because it's constantly changing, and I think it's good to be consistently reminded of what it is doing to us and how we can better tame it and so forth. So if you have feedback, I'm all ears. If you want to email it, you want to talk to me, whatever. Positives and negatives both. You only learn from the truth. So thank you for being here. Questions?